thank you for joining us, Andy. I've been trying to think about how to introduce you, and I'm struggling because you've got so many hats on. So I'm going to go with possibly the most energetic EdTech entrepreneur who's been there from the start, which is strange because you look far too young to have been there from the start. But given, I think, I've got this right, if Angel Solutions was started in 1999, if I got that right, I hope I have. You've been through, or you've seen a lot of changes. So what's the biggest change you've seen in the subsequent 20?
Good question, isn't it? We've all been there, and some people obviously in education have been there a lot longer than me. Yeah. I would have said before COVID, things like the corporate spending review and budget cuts, where suddenly we were like, wow, that was a huge change, even though I know that there'd been challenges prior to that in terms of my innings. But I definitely think COVID and that whole switch and the fallout from that, and then more recently, just the challenges with, all the stuff we know about parental complaints, SEND, recruitment, retention. It feels like for me, this is the toughest time in education ever. And I think that's why we like being around, because, we know those parameters. And for anyone involved in education, you've got to look to sort and address those issues. You've got to have things that solve those things. There's no more fluffy whistles and bells anymore, is there? So, yeah, I still think COVID is right up there in terms of its follow-on impact. Not so much probably the people who've been through the wars and had to, teach in bunkers with gas masks on. They would have said, you guys have got it easy, wouldn't they?
What frustrates you the most in that time?
I think there was a lot of things that happened that were really good. We saw things like parental staff, start parents' evening meetings switching to online. And, that opened up a whole world of possibilities. It meant, teachers could actually be at home. They could block out half an hour with their kids, have some food. It kept them short. There wasn't the overrunning. It meant people weren't rushing from work. And while I know that there are some obviously wonderful benefits of doing stuff face to face, I do think that's a good example of once COVID was over, it felt like everyone just went back to what they did before. And I know for both of you, some of those things that we said, hey, let's not lose this opportunity to rethink how we do things. I think that's the most frustrating thing, is it feels like a lot of things just went back to the way they were.
Because of fear, because of finances, lack of training, all of which is understandable. But yeah, missed opportunity doesn't quite cover it, I don't think.
There's a lot of things we learn over the period, though, where there's, we often think the solution is, well, you can try something, it works, therefore why don't you keep doing it, without recognizing the link to capacity. There's lots of conversations at the moment about the future of education and hybrid learning, and people immediately flip and say, well, we saw what that was like during the pandemic, as if what we saw in the pandemic was actually an effective hybrid learning measure. It wasn't. It was people trying to accommodate at short notice and deliver, a combination of a learning experience, but nothing like what actually hybrid learning is all about, between the fusion of in-person and online and so on. And it feels the same where, you used a really good example there, Andy, and it's like, well, we talk about staff wellbeing and workload and retention. What's the problem with having half of our parents' evenings digital and half in person? And doesn't that also allow some of the parents that never attend because they're in jobs where they don't often have the decision making or the flexibility to dip out early, suddenly finding they can be a bit more prescriptive and join a later thing online when the member staff's already gone home and had dinner? And you find the compromises in these things. But I don't know that education is always very good at allowing flexibility in those core practices. Staff want to be, school leaders often want to be, but the system's not quite so ready for it. That's my sense. I mean, we're going to talk about Ofsted in a minute and the bits and pieces, and we can then talk about rigidity and inflexibility in a different way, I guess, can't we?
I was going to talk about data first, because, Andy, your company's in every school in the UK, in England, essentially, and it's one of the few companies that actually is, and you're Mr. Data, and I'm Mr. Don't Understand Data, and we've had two other experts on this morning that have got data expertise behind them, to say the least, I think, Al, with the PhDs and things. How is data going to, Ofsted, we'll come to that as well, but Ofsted was a one-word judgment. Data, in a way, was quite simple in that we had 98% of the schools at this or whatever it was, and now it's more of a narrative-based with its lovely colour scheme. Really, I think they missed a trick not using emojis still. I really do think they should have gone for emojis. But how's the data analysis going to change, and how is that going to impact what we do after Ofsted as well? Because we can now actually see a much greater spread of data.
I think data is one of those really weird things in that, if you look at your core statutory assessment, so for example, we collect the early years and phonics for every child in the country. When it was Key Stage 1 statutory, we do the same as well. And of course, in terms of if we think about all the different audiences, the schools are often, well, that's already happened. We've done an assessment, we've done our test. Now we have to submit it historically often to multiple places. They're then wanting to assemble it, clean it, check it, and get it off to often the Department for Education. And then if you think about timing of that, if we're all saying the impact that data could make is actually meant to be for the children, if a child is going off track or is struggling or is ready to progress to the next level, whatever that may be, year 2 to year 3, year 6 to year 7, all those key transition points. I think the challenge we've always got is historically, I don't know if you remember this, the Ofsted data dashboards used to come out like March or April for the previous summer's results. Now, of course, okay, things have changed now. We work very closely with NCR, which is a consortium of every LA in the country, which is why we got the privilege of being in every school. So they're all collecting that because that's statutory. So we just give back to the schools as soon as the local authority feels that they've collected enough of the school's data within their LA. Say, right, here you go, Al, here's your school's results for, say, phonics compared to Cumbria local authority, if it was you, Matt, or whichever one of the split that those two have gone in. It's hard to keep up versus a national, because I think if you think about empowering a leadership team in a school or your conversations with your governors or your trustees, there's a big difference between saying we're down 1 percentage point compared to, but actually nationally it's down 1% too. I think sometimes the media, the parents, the IDSR dashboards are all quick to come in and make a judgment on data. So the thing I find interesting about data is that it's getting sparse now with statutory data snapshots. So in terms of national coverage, there's very few things that you can standardize and say everybody does this. And more recently with attendance data, because of the WANDS DFE project, we know that all schools submit attendance data daily. Well, it wasn't that long ago before we were comparing the attendance in our school or RLA with like a last year's national figure, which just seems bonkers given we all know the variation with the impact of Christmas jumpers or, the first week back. So I think generally assessment data, technology has meant that we should be living in real time. Which child is not in school today? Internal truancy issues, they are in, but they're not in the lesson. The schools need that. Whereas often the accountability frameworks, they're interested in amassing, curating, looking at their thresholds, their benchmarks. Have we met what we politically said we do? And that's the disconnect for me, is you've got a driver there that's not actually driving necessarily best outcomes for children.
It's been covered this morning already, hasn't it, with discussions about social capital and things like that. But I've got an email 27th of January, Andy, from the DFE, so I've not looked at yet. And it's comparing my school to 20 similar schools in the country with similar characteristics. And I get why the DFE sends it, and I'm sure there might be some very useful insights in that data, but every school is unique. And I often feel when I get these things that similar schools, that whole concept of similar schools is just nonsense. Might be similar data, but not many have alpacas, for example. It's not a very good example in terms of the actual impact on kids, but who thinks that this is a good use of time and money? And is it a good use of time and money? Because I'm sure it is for some and in some ways, or is it just me being my usual daft, grumpy, whatever Al calls me?
I think if you step back a little bit from the specifics of what we're talking about in education, I think any organisation, when you're in a silo, it's really good to be able to benchmark. For me, talking to other business leaders, I can go and talk to someone with 10,000 employees, but they're going to have different challenges or issues compared to me with 50 staff. Right. I've grown organically with no loans, jets or overdrafts. That'd be different for someone who's just got £10 million investment. So I think for me, benchmarking inherently is good, isn't it? Like I said earlier, down 1%, down 5% nationally. Wow, we're actually doing better. I think the issue around is what criteria you choose. And I know they've changed that recently, haven't they? There's the new EDACI 2025 data. There's talks about, it always has been about whether free school meals is the right indicator or not. But if having been in education a long time, both governors in schools, both in a local authority for 2 years, we still got to remember that if you measure anything, and what happens with free school meals is if you're right at the top end of a free school meal boundary and you don't do anything, that's my ring doorbell, come in, you don't do anything about your outcomes, but you just work to get into the next comparison, then that's where we're using similar schools, I guess, incorrectly, because it's actually easier to go, I won't do anything about what I'm doing with my children, but I'll look to get into the next boundary bracket so I'm compared maybe with a more favorable set of results. And I'm not saying that that's a wrong thing to do, because actually the driving behavior here is those accountability frameworks and the challenges.
Yeah.
That's the challenge for me, is why are we using that benchmark data? If it was there as a genuine, we're here to help the sector and make decisions about, are you spending too much on staffing or lighting or heating? Absolutely, give me that data. But I think it's used in a way that people feel like that's not fair because these are the situations in my school.
Can I just jump in there, Matt? I think there's a distinction here, which is, if I would argue, is where actually some of the real value comes from using the tools that Andy provides, which is a lot of data we capture is government initiated, as Andy's kind of shared, and it can be sometimes a bit thin, but it always ties around certain areas. And often as a user, whether it's at governance, whether it's at school leadership, whether it's at parental level, that data doesn't necessarily resonate as being helpful or directly informative. But when you pull some of the data together and put it in more of a context position, it does give you, maybe I'd argue, a reason to ask different questions. So I know for my roles working on our combined authority and on our region that we often get statistical neighbour is Telford and Wrekin. I'm not sure I've ever been to Telford and Wrekin, but it's not geographically close by, but in terms of areas of deprivation, areas of challenge and so on, it allows a little bit of I wonder what they're doing differently kind of conversations at a very high level. When we get into Idaki and waiting 5 years, and depending on which side of the window it gives you a stake, you can feel like you're almost out of date before you start. To me, I'm interested in your perspective, Andy. Is the secret sauce bringing the bits of data to put them into purposeful hoppers that actually makes them useful, as opposed to just having to go fishing for all the statistical national data?
Yeah, and if I'm honest, we come back to capacity, skill set and time. I think I would champion the cause of every data manager. If any data managers are watching this, then often the assessment data lead, and the map, I'm generalizing here. I know there'll be different examples, but they're not always got a seat at the SLT. They're often being, will the data person go away and match shoe size with potholes with key stage 2 outcomes?
There often is an SLT, Andy, I should just say. Small schools,
Yep. And even in some of the bigger ones, you talk to data people and they're always looking at all this data saying, there's so much we could do.
Andy, I don't know if you can hear us, but you've just frozen. Visually and audio as well. You're on mute.
Sorry, it all just froze for a second. I think Andy was about to collect so much data that it's just paused while he collects it.
It's collapsed, yeah. Can you hear us, Andy?
We'll just give him a second.
It's a very clear picture, so it seems odd, doesn't it?
Yeah, we can edit this. But I say there's been a few little funnies today on Riverside, so hopefully it's just a little glitch. He's gone. Hopefully he'll drop back in again.
Back in. So is it still recording then, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. We've got the bits around the balance and perspective tools around teacher workload and beyond the rhetoric, which I think would be really interesting to unpick.
The workload is the thing, isn't it, with everything?
And then I think we probably should just give Andy a chance to talk about their new AI features like Tilda, which is something he's been talking about. Not sure I fully understand it, but that's why it's probably really nice if he could share what they've been doing with AI, where they see it fits with that data.
Right, I see that, yeah. I've not actually read the document after all. It's just we've just signed up with Compass, Al, and Compass now produces all my teacher reports, but I'm still minded to write them myself, but I might be copying and pasting a few sections now, I think, and graphics.
It's whether you'd feel, comfortable doing that. Would you use AI to write a letter to a parent? I wouldn't feel comfortable.
I need to know it.
Things, when it comes to understanding analysis, then yeah, maybe.
I need to write it to know it. Otherwise, when they ask questions, you think, well, I don't know. I'll just check on LinkedIn to see what's happened. I'm hoping you'll get in. This is something silly like a power cut or something silly like that.
Oh, he's back.
Hello. You all right?
No, I have two Wi-Fis here, Virgin and Sky, and both just totally went. Both of them. Can you believe what redundancy issues we have? Anyway, sorry about that.
You were just about to talk about big amounts of data, so I assumed you'd gone to get it.
Big box.
How do you want to play that in terms of where we got up to, where I froze?
Yeah. Let's just revisit in terms of the last bit you were asking.
I think we were talking about the role of assessment leads and the quantity of data, weren't we? Did you get that?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I have the fun of taking the stream and getting rid of all of our little bits in between. So we'll figure it out.
Maybe the follow-up question is, data is very powerful, Andy, but you mentioned time there. Time to do these things and time to use it and time to set the actions that have been identified by the data. And it comes back to this accountability in schools, whether it's Ofsted, Progress 8, SATs. There doesn't seem to be enough time sometimes to do what's the most important thing for the learners.
Yeah, Al, you'll definitely feel this in terms of all the tools that we're involved in. But software at the end of the day should make something easier, quicker, better. And the trouble is, because of the challenge with training, you meant whiteboards when they were rolled out, that's great, but calibrating them and getting them used properly, use the software, a lot of them just became redundant. I've seen schools where they've just gone down the Apple Mac route. Nothing wrong with Apples, are they? But unless you go and train the staff who are used to using Windows PCs on what's the difference, then, good luck trying to get them to do even the most basic of tasks. So if we come back to, if it takes you all the limited hours you have left in your week just to get the data, then you're tired, you're burnt out, it's 11 o'clock at night. Good luck trying to look at that to see what's the difference it can make. And so I think we're all struggling, both private sector and schools with time and capacity. We're having to be ruthless, aren't we, with what we can and can't do. Most data teams would want, I need another 2 or 3 people in here. But I'm talking about a time at St Helens Local Authority when I had 2 years there of having to go to schools to get floppy disks to take the data out of SIMs, because if they did come to me, they'd be empty. Even transferring the data onto a floppy disk was a challenge back then.
One disk or dozens of disks?
And I think we've all got to remember at the heart of this, if you come back to the heart, the school, often the people in charge of entering that data are themselves not data specialists. They are wonderful people who will make sure that Jimmy gets their packed lunchbox because, they forgot their packed lunch and the parent or guardian comes in, and they will know the names of every child and they will do way beyond their job remit. But they're not a full-time assessment lead. And yet often a lot of the data that goes into that system is operated by people who are just trying to do the best job that they can. And that data is then aggregated up and integrated in other systems, and you end up with all sorts of anomalies. It's hard. I think the biggest challenge we've got with education data, though, is this. Often our systems pride ourselves in accuracy. So we will go way beyond, is that date of birth correct? Is there a male or a female or other value in this field? We'll say, actually, there's a lot of children with the 1st of September. Actually, we think that's just, they had to put a value in. They hadn't seen the date of birth certificate. Matthew's down as female. We're not saying Matthew can't be female. We're just saying that could be an anomaly. Now, when you clean up data, you imagine Ofsted or any other framework coming in to say, your attendance is 93%. That's bad. You'd want the accurate data. If we're saying actually it's 96, that's when you want to empower schools especially to say it's not 93, it's 96, and I can prove it. The trouble is, if accurate data says actually it's 89, then you use the public data. You say, yeah, that's bad, isn't it? But internally, the truth that the facts are it's 89. And therefore, we're always having to hold in dynamic tension. Here's the accurate value and here's the published value. And people are still, understandably, picking the one that they will use for a public meeting, a prospectus, or an Ofsted conversation. And that's hard because we're not talking in facts now. We're talking in defensive positions, are we? We're saying, I need to protect myself from this attack. That sounded quite harsh, didn't it?
No. Makes perfect sense, and it's always interesting. The data seems black and white, but actually, if it's a SATs result, for example, in a small school like ours, and we've got 9 kids, and one of those kids has crawled in school that day feeling really sick, that has a huge impact on our data.
Huge.
And similar in bigger schools, with different scenarios and things. Just flipping this a little bit, you're definitely unique in terms of an EdTech company, in terms of your culture. And certainly your values. And so we've been down to school and used it a couple of times, and there's been nobody working there because you let them work from home and you trust your staff. So your staff retention is probably quite higher. But I don't know, I feel like technology, I wouldn't say EdTech, I know it's not, EdTech is a bit of a vague term, Al, isn't it? It doesn't quite cover everything. Technology seems to be very big tech, venture capital based almost, or increasingly so. So how do you stay true to being a ringmaster? How do you keep the company up there with everybody else while still maintaining those values?
If you were asking me this before COVID, now you probably have a view on this in the years that you've been going. That was quite easy. We were all in the office, but we did lots of fun things, monthly innovation days, charity days. So even though we were we were never that, boy, it's 9:01, you're late. We've never been that. But I think what's happened now, it's gone so far the other way that while we saw COVID coming, we actually sent people home 3 months before we were officially all told to, because then that gave us a bit more flexibility to sort of come in and get some more kit or make sure everyone's home setup was okay. But I think we've got a divided camp now. I think we're always going to. There are some people that work in our home that love it, and they're never going to go, yes, I want to come in the office more. We got some who physically can't. They'd love to, but they can't. They don't have space at home, Wi-Fi issues. But we all agree, though, when we do come together, whether it's 4 times a year for our quarterly review, our fun day at the start of the year, our strategy day, everyone always knows that you cannot beat when you do come together. The difference here is we took it for granted when we were together 5 days a week. So I think a lot of this is about what you do when you're all in, not just should you be in the office, in school, should PPA be in school or outside school, should parents' evenings be online or not. I think it's about providing the flexibility and focusing more on the outcomes. Does it matter that my salesperson is only working an hour a month if they're generating £1 billion of sales? Which they're not, by the way, in case anyone's listening to this. But can you simply focus on...
Sent them a request for a job opportunity.
So the outcomes, you look at anything, a football team, I'm not sure, England football team having a manager from overseas, we win the World Cup, everyone thinks it's the best thing ever. A lot of this is all about, does it work for the school, the organisation, the parent, the pupil, rather than there's a black or white decision here about should we do this or this.
I really like that, Andy. There's so many comparisons with what you share and the way that we do things in our organisation. There are lots of similarities. I'd argue there are tensions even within the organisation. I have some of my folks who are responsible for a sales team that want everybody in the building at all times because the sales teams function better when they're together. And I have leads on my development side that feel that it would be best if it was all done under the cover of darkness and that they didn't have to come out during daylight. So in many ways, you have to work harder now to have reasons to come together. We have connection days where we bring everyone together, but you have to have a purpose, don't you? Otherwise, it's just free pizzas and a mingle, and it doesn't really serve any benefit.
You had one on Friday, Al, didn't you? I think you didn't.
Yeah, we try to do them every couple of months. It's about bringing teams together. So for example, this time, although it was I brought the sales and marketing teams together to talk about a new fictitious product launch. And it was because always when you launch something new, you have the sales team sort of saying, well, why don't marketing do this or social campaign or this brochure or this emailer campaign? And you get the marketing team saying, why don't the salespeople actually talk about the product this way or do these resources? So put them together and you do realize that sometimes, it's a great shock as usual for all the theme of our chats we've been having, Matt. The human factor tends to rise to the top no matter what technology and infrastructure you've got in place. And I think that's just what we share here is, everything's about taking the raw information and how we as people interpret it. And I see that with many of Andy's tools, it's all about the effort and the time goes into making sure that you can actually get the right interpretation and the right kind of reference to information that's grounded from a human-centric point of view in something that's actually useful to me, will let me help inform my decision-making, and I think that's the core of it, where we talk about AI, and I'm quite interested for Andy to share about the AI features that are coming into his solutions, is where it's not replacing human judgment. It's just allowing you to operate quicker and then prepare the information in the way that's better. But that's not a very good example of what's new in your tilde and bits. But so Andy, perhaps you can share what's kind of how you see that fusion of AI and humanity in decision-making and process.
I think if anything was going to change the workload issue, for Matt, you sitting there firmly in the schools camp and knowing the pressures all the way down to a small school where the head teacher is also teaching 60% of the time. Each child is worth, 10%. All the factors you have, all the way up to the big schools with genuine other real challenges. And the two are not at each other's heads. It's very hard to solve some of these challenges nationally. AI for me has been probably the one thing that I've seen out of everything that's come along that gives us a fighting chance to get some of that back. Policies, letters, checking things. It's a massive, massive opportunity here to really do something. And I think most people would say we're firmly in that journey. We're still at the infancy. We'll probably sit here if we did a podcast a year and laugh at some of the tools we're using now. Imagery, the creation of imagery. I mean, that's been fantastic, hasn't it? I mean, you both use that a lot. Just the fact that everyone treats it every day now, the old days of looking for something on Google Images. I think the division I'm seeing here is DfE, local authority, understandably, have always been that statutory, accountability, policy driven. I don't want to say red tape bureaucracy with a negative vibe, but you don't tend to see the stories that you do about what's happened with financial irregularity over here. It just wouldn't happen in LA world typically because there's just too many safeguards. They're very slow moving tankers. Now, I'm genuinely, for anyone listening to this, we sit in both worlds. We work with every LA. So I'm not here to say I've worked in an LA and I understand those factors. So AI that's a very risk averse thing. There would typically be in that Bell adoption curve. Let's wait to see. Let's wait until the DfE have given approval. Let's wait to see what is acceptable, but let's make sure we've got, every policy under the sun of what you can or can't do. In contrast to that, what we've seen with the academization and maths is a lot more freedom because of the infrastructure, the data, let's get together for a hackathon. Let's use tools like Microsoft Fabric and, you got your Matt Woodruffs of this world with all the stuff that they're doing. And it feels like there's a real, wow, let's innovate. And they are two very, very different camps. You also see the freedom for parents to send in parental letters of complaint. And we see that we're part of Head Teacher Chat. We see tens of thousands of leaders in there all saying just the number of incoming complaints that you can see are all written by ChatGPT, the long dashes. And they're allowed to. The notion of data controller and data processor, and it's just their child. They can say whatever they like with an open sourced type tool like ChatGPT. Yet the restrictions on a school being able to respond that with what you can upload. And obviously there are tendencies. There are things like, Copilot within the Microsoft framework or Google Gemini between Google Workspace, where you're going to get some security and safety. Those things are not being trained on. But actually for a lot of people, if you've just downloaded ChatGPT or Gemini on your phone, it will be so easy to respond to stuff like that. And I think what we haven't seen yet with AI is, I hope it doesn't, but it is going to, something will happen. There'll be a data breach or something that will reinforce the position of people saying, you see, that's why it's a bad thing. And I think the camp over here need to be very careful with look at all the things we can do without necessarily bringing some of that local authority accountability in. I think there's still a lot of things that I wouldn't be surprised if they did happen because it's just too easy to do it, isn't it? So I hope there isn't that one major thing that puts a lot of blockers on everyone being able to use it. That was my biggest fear, I guess, with AI.
Tell us about Tilda, Andy, because one of my questions was about workload for head teachers and teachers, and you've created Tilda, and it seems to be something. I mean, I'm looking at head teachers' reports here that I do regularly, and having that facility to drag the data into it in a useful form that I can understand would save me a bit of work. So tell us a bit about that.
Sounds like one of the islands you visit up in Scotland somewhere, Matt. Oh, okay, up close then.
So here's my take. Obviously, AI comes along, brilliant. Tools like ChatGPT, and it's been through so many iterations. I think it would be fair to say the first draft of all those tools we saw out there, you see it at Bet still, whatever the thing is, AI at the end. A lot of them are front ends to ChatGPT. And you know what? For some of the education sector, and probably still is true, you need that because there's maybe not enough training, awareness, capacity to understand what just good prompt engineering looks like. So over the years, we've seen a lot of people saying, why aren't you just using ChatGPT to do that? Or you don't need to buy a tool for that. You could do that yourself. Don't waste your money. Now, the challenge is for any EdTech product is you're first to market. That we all know that's a really big, important point. Okay, your Sims losing ground to your Arbors, your Bromcoms, that was ripe for disruption. It was a big monolithic beast. Next gen had been coming for ages, no disrespect to anyone, but along comes some disruptors. So where Tilda came in was that whatever AI tool you're using, it tends to still generate the content you need. That was the thing that everyone was struggling with. If the three of us are busy leaders in a school, try writing performance management targets, success criteria, strategy and actions for every member of staff. So historically, tools like ours have said, we'll give you a tool that when you do think of that stuff, we'll let you track it, monitor it, put it into a plan, share it with governors, make sure everyone's responsible for it, make it look good, get it ready for Ofsted, attach interim reviews and evidence to it. We had a brilliant tool, but the thing that everyone was struggling with, whether it's here's a tool that helps you write your CEF, it's like giving you to Microsoft Word and say, go write me a novel. And you're going, I don't know how to write a novel. So I think what we've had is we've had brilliant tools in the EdTech sector. And then along came AI with some front ends to it that did the bit that everyone was struggling with the workload capacity. They were saying, I don't know what to write in my CEF. You know, Andy, we love your tool about there's a box for leadership and management and some bite-sized questions that help me work out what the grade is. And I can upload my evidence, but what do I say in there? Or has what I've said, is that any good? If Ofsted came along, you know, what would they think? So what we've done is when you're not first to market, what you can do is see how is the sector using it. And they're all using it to do their CEFs, their development plans. They're looking at if that's something we need to do in our school, how would I go about doing that? Structure it into some milestones for me. So what Tilda did is it harps back to the day that because you young scallywags like me, we're all young whippersnappers, it's like those really annoying Microsoft Clippy, isn't it? Back in the day, Word, hi, says Clippy. Matt, I noticed you're writing a letter. Do you want me to help with that? And the trouble is, it just wasn't very good, was it? It became annoying.
It was irritating.
It was. I mean, it was all, Al, you actually looked like the Albert Einstein little character that was there. And I had more fun watching the animations than I did about, you know, okay, it would do, dear sir, madam, yours sincerely, insert address. I think if we could go back to that era where if you got your Word document trying to do a CEF, which is what still a lot of schools do that in, is if we'd have had that Microsoft Clippy, but it actually could take and understand and know your school and personalize it. And that's what Tilda's doing. It's joining the two together now. It's saying, here's a framework that lets you track and monitor and stay on top of stuff. And Tilda will either craft content for you or take what you've done and refine it and give you a better version of it, rather than it sitting there in an output that you then got to paste into Word or Excel.
It's working alongside professional judgment sort of thing, as
Absolutely.
opposed to, you know, just creating something that, which is what the big worry about AI is, that kids and people will just use it and not look at it.
Correct.
It's what created this sort of stuff out there.
Even as a trustee of a number of charities, you know, when I look at policies, I'll always use AI to go through and find errors, mistakes, cross-references, out-of-date references. But I'll never just go 30 seconds later, there you go, there's the changes. You've still got to work through those and go, nah, that's not right for us as a charity. Is that what you were going to say, Al?
Well, I think, you know, you guys going to nail it there. I think those who are refining and understanding the place for AI tools on the whole is that they're helper apps, they're not replacer apps, you know. And I think if you look at ways that it can help save you time and it can bring the key bits together, I mean, the skill still comes in making sure you're bringing the right bits together, then we're always going to advocate human in the loop. But human in the loop where you haven't got to sift through an awful lot of different places and go find bits to cut out is always going to be a saving. And it's almost like we just need to get past this idea that when somebody says we use AI, that we immediately think it's either a robot that's going to run wild or it's just simply a ChatGPT prompt, and say there's a whole different ways of looking at AI. And in some cases, it's about taking all the questions that you would consider in a room for the last 3 hours and then remembering all those and applying it every time it needs to look at something for you. You know, and that's, you know, we talked with Nick Ponsford about having that kind of, you know, social capital and cultural capital, all these different capitals. And it's like, is it not okay to say, surely, that some of our technology can have all the right capital in terms of the right questions and the right insights it needs to look for to support you in all of your judgments? You know, 10 years ago, we'd have said it's got a fixed set of rules, fill in all the boxes, and it will calculate an answer at the bottom like an Excel spreadsheet. And we'd say, well, that seems perfectly reasonable. No one would say, yeah, but who checked the adding up? It's the same thing I think applies, is we're not trying to replace humanity here. And I think, and Andy's key, like many EdTech companies, is people often start with what we do and how do we do it and forget to mention the why. Whereas Andy's explain things in the why. Why are we actually providing this tool? Does it have a purpose, and what we're trying to mitigate as an issue? And I guess it's time again, isn't it, Andy? The biggest one of all is how do we unlock time for leadership and staff to do the really important stuff?
One biggest thing that we've done, and I don't mind sharing this, knowing that, any competition out there, you're welcome to embed this.
Nobody listening, it's right.
Is there's a lot of AI tools out there that you put something in and it gives you a response. Now, the three of us all know that you can ask a tool like AI, when you give your response, can you explain why you said what you did? I think there's too many tools out there that go, there you go, there's a lesson plan. There you go. There's your performance management targets. Whereas with Tilda, not only does it come up with something, it says, what's the rationale behind that? Because I think what the sector definitely wants is where you are curious about tools like AI and you struggle with something you've maybe never done before as a new head. The help is at 10 o'clock at night when you're doing this, don't just give me what I need, copy paste. Why did you say that? Why did you change what I wrote so that there's some learning in there as well? And I think if AI tools can remember that it's not just about the response, but it's helping to explain, why did I say that? That's a big part for what Tilda does.
It's a different example, Andy, on a context, but I heard a great one from a session that Victoria Headland, often referred to as the bias girl, was sharing, which is when you finish an output and you've iterated something, is asked the question, what steps did you take to mitigate bias within your output?
Brilliant question.
And actually challenging back in terms of what you're showing. And it's the same concept in a different way as you saying about having a tool that's intelligent enough to challenge, to make sure process we know is one where it requires that, because it's not foolproof. And if you've been on listening 45 minutes ago, an hour ago, when we were recording a session with Caroline Keep, we'd have got down to the point of the individual tokenization of words and down to characters, and how it's not got the answers, it's just using its very best predictions based on a very large data set. So, human in the loop comes full circle. Matt, as always, with our 30-minute target, we're at 40 minutes. We need to wrap things up. You normally like to do Andy, if you've got power of God for the day or a magic wand, have you got two magic wands?
Two. I've got two. I'm just trying to look at Perspective Premium online as well. Two magic wands. One magic wand is, what's the biggest thing you would change in terms of education or ringmaster's baton, stick? And the second one is, if you were doing a new theme for your offices nowadays, what would you go with?
Okay, the first one, I actually think I want everybody to assume that everybody's being given the staff wages that they want and need to do what they need to do in school, which we know isn't going to happen. But living in that world, almost like I've asked some of our team sometimes, what would you do if you had 20 grand to spend versus 100 grand to spend versus $1 million? Because those are three very different questions. I think we all know that even though we would definitely address the cost of living issues and the TAs that can earn more money elsewhere, but I still think those same issues are there in our sector in terms of workload, societal problems being lumped at the door, the challenges for SEND nationally. So if we took away budget, I think the same question should be asked. What would we as a sector, and I'm saying we because I feel part of it, having been part of it, governors, trustees, local authority, wife as a teacher, what would we do if the focus just wasn't on making sure that we could pay our staff? Let's wave the magic wand. I think that focus too often in the last 10 years is either combative, unions, EFE, Ofsted framework changes, and we can all sit here, I don't want to say moaning or whinging, but we know what all the issues are. We know why they're doing that. Why have they changed that? We know there's a fallout from what happened with Ruth Perry, and we're expecting to see that in the Ofsted framework. But what my magic one would be is the sector would start thinking of, how do we solve some of those? Because sometimes some of the solutions we have, we know if you go up the chain, those things are not going to happen. It doesn't mean that we aren't right to say, well, they should fund that. But if we're going falling number on roll, budgets nationally, huge deficits, it's not going to be solved by a change of government political party. So I'm a big fan of, for everyone listening, okay, but what can we do? We can spend lots of time and energy saying about all the problems and all the challenges. And it's not to diminish the importance of those, but I think for leaders' sanity, we need to find those things that plot paths through no matter how difficult our situations is, or else we're going to lose a lot of leaders, we already are, and we're not going to see new leaders coming in. And I'm scared of what that scenario looks like where, schools are just, sorry, we've just got no leadership team, or, we've only got 50% teachers. That's a genuinely real and scary proposition.
Not far off, Andy, are we really? Realistically, retention, recruitment, leadership, it's...
So it feels like all those 10p's on those machines, and it just takes one more 10p, and you hope they don't go down the side slots and that you get the win. So my magic one would be that for people within, just stop for half an hour in the day, repurpose that staff meeting. Just say, come on, guys, how do we use this not to talk about all the rules or things that are in an email? Let's use this. Pair up. How can we solve some of the immediate challenges so that we find some solutions in the midst of what, to me, is a huge amount of challenge? Theme-wise for the office is very hard when you've got a circus. But in the last 5-6 years, you bring in a bit of a space theme in a room, a Narnia theme in a room. So it feels like we enjoy a bit of rotation with some of the sub-themes here.
I like that.
The Anfield theme in there, Andy. Come on.
The Anfield, yeah. Well, we've got the Cop already as our grandstand seating.
Yeah.
So there you go.
And can I just throw into the mix also, thank you for just being a nice bloke, Andy. You're somebody that's out there, you're supportive, you're kind, you always check in on folks. As much as there are lots of good folks, there's not many that take the time to actually live and be part of the community and make an effort. So thank you for that as well.
Well, back to you both.
Yeah, who hosts schools for like away days? Children, I mean, in an office, it's unique.
Yeah, your year 6 is coming down for a Saturday. That was fun, wasn't it? Having a council meeting. They were so awesome. They were so well behaved. They cleared up after themselves. I was like,
very good.
If only all children could think and act like the Crossway Primary School year 6s.
Oh, thank you very much. I'll tell him you said that.
They are a very, very special group of kids and staff there. And alpacas. I've once famously called them llamas, and Matt was not happy. There's no tolerance.
Everyone does, honestly.
Yeah. It's like I've turned up in an Everton shirt. He was very dismissive very quickly.
You wouldn't be let in.
Well, Matt, you'll be pleased as we finish this. I've just put in our bedroom finally after 16 years, the carpet going threadbare. The colour of the carpet was alpaca, and I thought immediately of you as our carpet went down. So there you go.
I thought you were going to say bright red for Liverpool. I thought that'd be a lot. Yeah. Okay. Right. Thank you very much, Andy.
Thank you as always. A pleasure to see you, my friend. Look after yourself.
Thank you very much.
And we'll say take care to folks as well for this latest episode.